watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock.
Hello. Thank you so much for listening to the Bold Moves podcast. I am Mandy Bryce. I am the host, and this is episode number 281. Today, I am sharing my interview with Corey Staley, who has moved across the country back and forth a couple times, completely shifted gears from careers in the military to the media, nonprofit, all over the place, and I think you're going to love her story. She was introduced to me by Paris, who you met a while back as a guest, and I can completely understand why they're friends because they're both bold move makers, and I think you will like to hear what they have to say, so stay tuned for that. Without further ado, here's my chat with Corey Staley. Hello, everyone. Today I am chatting with Corey Staley. Welcome to the show, Corey.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too. So you found me through Paris. I'm excited because she had such a great story. She was a recent guest, and now it is your turn to share a little bit about who you are and some of the risks and bold moves that you've taken that have made you the perfect candidate to be chatting with me today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. That's honestly one of, it's funny that we, both know Paris, but she is, I will say, a very bold person and she inspired me. So I'm so excited to share my story with you.
I love that. I hope it starts a ripple effect and inspires people you don't even know exist by hearing your story. That's the goal of the podcast.
Yeah, of course.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and, the bold moves that you've made.
Yeah. I think that my very first bold move that I ever did in this life was coming out of the womb 3 months early. My parents are always like, wow, you really came into this world with a bang. So I guess I was just so excited. I just couldn't wait to get started.
Love that.
But I think I will kind of maybe start after college. I think that's maybe probably a good place to start. I studied communications, which is, I think, a pretty normal major, but right after school, I went to go work for the Army, which was completely very different. I had no idea what I was doing. I was a 23-year-old girl working with all men and learning the ins and outs of how recovery vehicles work, which is the most random thing. I was
what even is a recovery vehicle?
Yeah, great question. I had to learn that. So a recovery vehicle is, if a tank goes, is out in the desert in Iraq and it gets stuck, well, this equally as large vehicle comes and essentially gets it back to the base. And so there's a lot of kind of mechanics that have to happen with that. And so after 4 years of that, I just decided, I was like, this cannot be my career. I cannot do this. And, my parents are like, what are you going to do? And so I just decided to switch careers. And so I went to go work for a nonprofit as a director of communications. And everyone was like, that is the wrong move. Don't do it. You're making such good money. But that didn't matter to me. It was more important that I did something that was more in line with what I love.
Sure.
And so I think that was probably one of my biggest, bold moves because it changed the trajectory of what I do as for a career. And so then after that, I decided to go change careers again because I was a little bit bored and get into social media. And this was kind of right on the cusp of social media being a thing, which I guess really dates me, but I'm just going to own it. And I decided to move to California just because there were, more opportunities. And so again, everyone that I knew was like, no, what are you doing? That's not what you should be doing. And I lived at the time in Richmond, Virginia, and people there grow up there, they get married there, they have kids there, and they usually stay there. And so this was a kind of a big deal. And so I just packed up all my things. I had no job, and I said, here we go. And, I think that's not uncommon for a lot of people, I think, here in LA, but from where I was in the East Coast, it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so then I was here for, I think maybe less than a year, and I decided this is not for me. Like, I am a person that follows their heart very much to the T. And
Yeah.
so then I moved back, which was like everyone here on the West Coast was like, no, 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 what are you doing? Not a great idea. And I'm like, I'm going. See you guys later. So I went back to Virginia, and I started a whole nother career. I decided to be a copywriter, which granted, all of these things are very much in line with each other.
Yeah.
But I just decided, well, I'm done with social media. It's not, I'm just ready to move forward to something else. And I think that's always been kind of a thing for me. It's like, well, what's next? I've conquered this. What's next?
Sure.
So while I was in Virginia, I did that. I became a bar instructor. I was just taking classes so often, and a teacher came up to me and was like, "You should teach class." And I was like, "I've never done that before. Something else to conquer. Sure, why not?"
Yeah.
And I've been doing that ever since. And then I decided, someone else said, "You should be a professor." And I was like, you know what? I've never done that before. I'm going to conquer it. Sure, why not? And so I was a professor to undergrad students for a while, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and then I decided I did all the things that you could do in Richmond, and I needed to go back to California. And everyone again was like, no, 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 this is a terrible idea. You don't have a job. And I was like, you know what? I don't disagree with you that this is a terrible idea, but I'm going to do it anyway because I have to follow what it is that I want to do, my heart. So I moved back again with my dad in tow. I made him drive cross country with me.
Oh my goodness.
And that was in August, and I'm back and I'm loving it. And I'm feeling very in line with all the things that I wanted to do. But along the way, there were definitely challenges. It was difficult. The first 6 months here back in LA was really hard, but
Yeah.
it was a move that I made and I had to stick with it. So
So
that's me.
what are you doing now here in LA?
Yeah, so now I'm a copywriter. I work for a startup, and it's a media studio, and we work on brands that are housed in China that are expanding internationally. So
Okay.
I do all the advertising, whether it's from social media. So I'm back there again, writing copy to that, to concepting, to writing commercials, and anything in between.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there were challenges and bumps along the way. I'm wondering, of all of those things that you've done, which are definitely all very bold moves, what would you say the scariest part of that was? Or it could be something you haven't even mentioned, but the scariest thing that you've gone through.
Yeah, I think probably for me, because I do so much, as does anybody, love knowing what's happening next. Like, I think we're all kind of creatures of habit and needing to know, what is this going to look like? I think the hardest part for me was not knowing the second time around in California how this was going to work out. I mean,
Yeah.
the first time I had a place to live, I was like, I'll figure out the job. But the second time I had nowhere to live. The person that I was supposed to live with, that fell through. I had no job whatsoever, no prospects.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really tough because I generally had no idea what I was going to do. And it was, the first 2.5, 3 weeks, I was just like, I'm working my butt off to try to find a job and, connect with people. But I was like, I'm running out of money and I don't
Yeah.
know how this is going to work out. And at the same time, I felt like I was a little too old to be, doing these, big moves and kind of like
Sure.
taking such a big risk. Well,
Mhm.
but I think that was a fear of mine, and it was just in the back of my head. And so it was both dealing with that fear and just not knowing what was going to happen, but trying to keep the faith and saying, okay, something's going to work out. And, if I have to, I don't know, cut grass, I'm going to make it happen. So
Yeah, I've said something very similar in my past, so I think we've got a couple
yeah.
things in common. How
Yeah.
did you push past that fear of making it work, even though there was so much unknown to it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was taking it a day at a time,
Hmm.
and talking with people that were around me and that were close and trying to, getting that reassurance there. And then
Hmm.
also for me, it was a lot of prayer. It was just like, okay, you know, I can either be buried by this fear or I can trust in something higher that, this is going to work out.
Hmm.
And, I think a lot of people, whether that's they're like, hey, a friend of mine, she and I have a saying where like the universe has got your back, like it's
Yeah.
fine, it's totally fine, the universe has got your back, and you're like, I'm drowning, things are falling apart, like there's a fire over here and a hurricane over here, and but it's fine, the universe has got your back. So I think kind of just repeating that mantra is really what got me through, and then remembering what skills I had to be like, hey, you know what, you are a catch when it comes to copywriting and being creative, and you're a hard worker, so those things are not for nothing. That's your kind of secret superpower.
I love that. That's so empowering. And I think anyone listening could probably, A, remind themselves that the universe or God or whoever they believe in has their back. And then B, probably make a pretty substantial list of the different superpowers that they have that are reasons why, they're going to be okay going through whatever. So I think that's such a
Yeah.
powerful tool. And I appreciate that. I want to go back to parts of your story now. So are you from Virginia originally? Is that home to you?
I am from Virginia. I'm born and raised. So I grew up in Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area.
Okay.
Um, and it's a military-esque town, and
Hmm.
a lot of people there as well. If you're not military, you grow up there and you stay.
Yeah.
So, then I moved to Richmond, which again, my parents were like, do you have to go so far? I'm like, it's only 2 hours. It's totally fine.
How do they handle
Um,
California?
I know it's totally funny, but it's as I was listening to, Paris's podcast or her episode, it's just interesting, the difference of how, what that big move looks like or feels like to different people,
Yeah.
and for me, it was like, it was a big deal, but it wasn't the end of the world. It was something that could be done. And, that's what planes are for. And it's 2019 and phones and Skype and all that
Skype,
stuff.
FaceTime. Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that. All right.
Yeah.
So then my next question is with your job of the working for the Army, were you doing that as a civilian or did you have to actually enlist to have that employment?
I was a civilian, much to
Okay.
my poor father's disappointment, who was always like, you should just enlist. I'm like, no, thank you. That's not for me. But I will say it was an experience, a really great experience being able to work with, military folks. They're a different breed of people. A lot
Absolutely.
of great lessons there. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that helped when you decided that that was going to be the end of your career, that you didn't have a contract of a certain number of years or so
Yeah.
on to fulfill.
Yeah. It was nice to be able to have that freedom for sure.
Absolutely. So that's, I guess, a blessing to not following your father's advice, taking that bold move and working as a civilian. I'm curious
Yeah.
about the nonprofit experience because it seems like while from a tax standpoint, there might be similarities, from a day-to-day life standpoint, it's probably extremely different. Can you talk a little bit about what you were doing there and how that was?
Yeah, for sure. It's a wonderful nonprofit called World Pediatric Project, and it was vastly different from working for the military. I went from an office of all men to all women, with
Wow.
one or two men, and it's interesting to have to, I think, adapt in
Mhm.
every kind of point in my life. There's been a level of adaptation,
Yeah.
even down to communication styles. I came in and I was communicating like very much in a military way, just almost
Hmm.
like very blunt, no kind of padding or softening, no exclamation points or smiley faces. And so when I got there, people were a little bit like, oh my gosh, wow, she's very blunt. And I had to, figure out how to tailor that communication aspect and adapt there. But
Yeah.
once I kind of got through that hump, I had my hands in everything, which I think was um, saying I had to say yes to a lot of things. Some things were
Mhm.
put on me and I had to say yes to, and some things I was like, I'm going to learn this. So I
Yeah.
didn't know. I went to school for public relations, but I wasn't necessarily able to had the skills really to put it into practice.
Sure.
That was a learning curve for me. And so I actually found a mentor who was been in PR for years, and she taught me how to pitch and how to do it well and how to, think about it from a very strategic point. And once I spent time with her, I started pitching these stories, and they were landing, in the newspaper and media, twice, 3 times a month. And so, it was really great to be able to see that, and then also to be able to tell the stories of these, that nonprofit sends teams of doctors over internationally every single year, and follows kids from the age of, from when they come in the system all the way until they're 18. And they're doing heart surgeries and plastic surgery and, ear, reformations, and helping them walk and actually live, because they don't have those, those tools there. So being able to tell that story was really rewarding, along with all the lessons that I learned and skills that I picked up. It was very cool.
I'm sure it sounds like it. It seems like from both of those two kind of first jobs or portions of your career, that a common thread would be the impact, because obviously a nonprofit, especially one doing things like that are medical and life-saving, life-changing, it's very blatant. But then in many ways, I'm sure the military is kind of doing the same thing in the efforts overseas. I'm curious how going from those two things to A, LA, which can be very superficial, and B, social media, which a lot of people criticize as being potentially superficial and damaging. Like, how did that, I guess, work with your mindset or work against your mindset? How did you manage that transition? And am I totally wrong? I could be totally wrong.
No. I mean, I think there are definitely components of that. I think I went from using for the nonprofit social media in a very meaningful way to be able to, collect donations and, kind of garner support. But, I was really fortunate when I moved to LA to work for a startup that was equally as, almost equally as in the message that the startup was portraying was pretty impactful, and it was about feminism. So again, it was, granted I had to pivot in a way that, it's just another level of adaptation, pivot in a way that was kind of a little bit more sexy and cool to fit the LA vibe, to support feminism in a way I think that was, that people could digest. But I will say that is, like, job wise, that was easier to do. But personally wise, that was a little bit more, I think, difficult, moving to LA and kind of seeing how some of those superficial aspects bubble up. I choose to be very positive about it, and I choose to use my social media in a way that's like, post what you want to post, and don't post to get likes. And I think that is a struggle for all of us, but definitely was a struggle for me in moving to LA and wondering, am I fitting in, quote unquote, am I doing it right? But then I got to a point where I was like, there is no right, there is no wrong. It is what you bring to the table, and how you do things and how you work and talk and dress. That's what matters. And that's what people generally at the end of the day are attracted to. And not necessarily that you're doing it to attract people, but there is a certain level of kind of intrigue and curiosity when you see somebody out there just doing their own thing. It's a beautiful thing. And so that's how I choose to approach social media. And that's also how I choose to work with brands when we talk about their social media and how we write their copy. It's you do you. You do you, because there is a kind of inherent valuableness there that I think people forget about.
I love that so much. And I was obviously making an assumption when I was sort of guessing what your role in social media was, because of course, social media pretty much covers everything, and it all depends on who you're doing it for. And it sounds like you, again, stayed true to following your heart, as you seem to always have and always will. and work for a great organization versus maybe some big corporation that just is out to make a buck or something like that. So I'm sure that helped a little with the transition in that way.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I think finding, for me, it's very important to find, companies and jobs and brands that resonate with me as a person. Mm-hmm. And I think that really, that is when you find that just makes your work better. It makes you better coworker and just like a better person in general. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I loved what you said too about the authenticity aspect. And I feel like authenticity, for a while, that word was getting a little overused almost, because people were trying to steer away from the overly edited perfection, doing things for likes. But at the same time, like, I feel like it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because I feel like some people are pushing it a little hard, or like fake authenticity is now becoming a thing. But I think it's really important to address. And I like that is your standpoint on it, especially as a professional. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think too that at the end of the day, you're able to spot fake authenticity. I think we all are. Right. So it's like, I would never, think that someone should use that as a tactic, whether you're a brand or you're just a regular person. It's just like, people need to realize the value of themselves. And like that, at the end of the day, is what we all really gravitate towards.
I love that. Yeah. So with such a variety of doing similar things, but in so many different settings, both geographically with both coasts, and then in nonprofit, government, and commercial private sectors, I'm wondering, I always like to ask people what their purpose is. And I know that can be a big question, and some people hate it and some people love it. And for some people it's very specific, and for some people it's a very broad thing. But I'm wondering if you know yours or have any grasp of it. And if so, if you don't mind sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I saw something somewhere in the land of Instagram, or I'm always reading something. And somebody said, do you know what your kind of your mantra is? And I was like, that's a very interesting question. Like your own brand, your own brand of your own mantra. Yeah. And I thought about it, and I realized what kind of lights me up is, for lack of a better word, is to make people seen, whether that's like through my job, like that comes into play of, and I'm constantly reminding brands this when they're like, oh, our product is so great. And I'm like, your product might be amazing, but what's in it for the audience, the consumer? Like, how can we relate this product in a way that makes them feel seen and that they feel understood? And that's how I also operate in my life as a friend, as a sister, as a in relationships. I think people really just want to be seen. They just want to be acknowledged for who they are. And that's what I try my best to do. Whether it's taking time to listen to somebody, whether it's, I don't like the word networking. It makes me want to vomit a little bit. I like
it's pretty
I like to think of networking as, what can you provide somebody else? And that, in order to be able to do that, you have to take time to listen to someone and understand kind of their pain points and allow them to be seen. So I think that is something that I really hold, near and dear to my heart. And I try to kind of let that be my guiding, light as I'm moving throughout ventures and life as a whole.
I love that. I'm in a couple of different groups where that is something that is talked about a lot. But even after doing, I don't know, something like 130-esque or somewhere north of 130 of these interviews, I've never had anyone say anything even close to that as their purpose. So I think that's really cool, because a lot of the time I can guess what people are going to say, which there's nothing wrong with, or it falls into kind of one of a few different lumps of similar ideas. But that was just a totally different answer, which I think is really cool, because like I said, I've heard a lot of people answer that question. Yeah. And never the way you did. So that's really cool.
Yeah, happy to share.
Absolutely. Speaking of sharing, it seems like you've done a lot of big transitions And you've said it so far in our discussion, like, oh, and I just decided I'm going to have to learn how to do that, or I'm going to learn this. And I don't know how old you are, but I know you studied PR and then got in at the beginning of social media being a potential career. So I imagine that there was some professional development that you had to do there. And this answer could go in a completely different direction to something to read on a lazy day when you feel like being slightly more productive than binge watching Netflix or something. But I would love your book recommendations.
Yeah, I love books, so I have plenty of book recommendations. But
Fabulous.
in terms of creativity, Steal Like an Artist is a wonderful one. It's super short. It's easy to get through. It has really fun illustrations. I think it's by Austin Kleon, and he really just kind of makes you feel comfortable in the process of creativity, and really, I think, brings to light things that we all kind of as creatives inherently know, like no idea is new. So it's okay if you are, about to start a campaign and you start on Pinterest by looking at a couple of famous campaigns and you draw inspiration from some of those and you make it your own. And that's whenever I'm working on something, that is exactly how I start. And I'm not afraid to admit it. I used to be a little shy and be like, oh my gosh, am I ripping somebody off? But I'm not, because no idea is new. And inspiration can be found anywhere. So for example, I just wrote a commercial, and I'd never written a commercial before, but I was like, well, I'm going to make it happen because I was asked. Right. And as I'm, talking, it's, the commercial's a little bit about kind of defying expectations. And there's a scene where a woman's at a salon and she's not really loving what it is that she's getting. And long story short, it ends up reversing and she kind of liberates herself. And so I said, on the liberation side, she should just flip her hair up. And the director's like, oh, I don't understand. Like, what's a hair flip? Like, I don't know. What do you mean? Like, and I was like very pointed and, I was describing this. And then finally I was like the Sex and the City scene where Carrie she's in it's the movie, the first movie, and she gets her hair dyed and she flips up. And I was like, did I just rip that off? And I'm like, you know what? It's inspiration. Like, that was an inspiration for that scene, and that's totally fine. So I would encourage anybody that is, wants to learn about the process of creativity and kind of think about it in a different way, to pick up that book. I love that. And then another one that I love is DV it's an autobiography of Diana Vreeland, who was the fashion editor for Vogue in the 60s all the way through the 70s. And it's another short book, but I love it because she has amazingly wild stories talking about her relationships with the Windsors and Jackie O and Jack Nicholson. And, the time that she's describing is just very fun. She's very almost campy, a little bit flamboyant. And my favorite thing is she's got incredible quotes. And then at the end of the day, she's like, this is who I am, or this is who this person is. And I love them because they never changed. They just brought who they were to the table. And that kind of like goes along the vein of saying, be authentic. And she's such an authentic person. It's so fun and it's witty and it's just like a really great read. I love it.
Love it. Great recommendation.
I would recommend both of those.
Yeah, the first one has been on my to read list, which is growing dramatically, rapidly all the time, especially since I get to ask so many people for recommendations. Second one, I've never heard of the book. I've heard of the author, but that sounds like a really fantastic one. So thank you.
It's very fun. So definitely check it out.
I love that. So I'm curious where people can find you online if they want to follow you and see the things that you're posting authentically and not for likes.
Yeah, I don't get that many likes, so that's how you know it's definitely authentic. You can find me on Instagram, and it's Corello, Corelo. On Twitter, where I'm not so much as active, but if you want to go back in the archives and see what I talked about, feel free. That's Miss Corey. And then I'm always on Facebook, so you can always connect Facebook and LinkedIn if you want to ask me a question or, anything like that. I'm on all of those things.
Fabulous. I'll make sure that all of those plus your book recommendations are in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Now, I feel like you've given good tips here and there in our conversation already, but I always like to ask people or give people the opportunity to share any lessons that you've learned, maybe from moving across coast, from changing careers, any of the bold moves that you've made, or books you've read, or just life, something you've learned recently. So if there's anything that you feel kind of impressed upon you to share right now, would be a great time for that.
Yeah, well, first of all, if you're going to go cross country, I would recommend that you put gas in your car because I did run out of gas. So preparation is key, people.
Good advice.
Yes. But I would say that's actually a really great question. For me, like in addition to being as kind of authentic as possible, in order to do that, there is a level of fear that you have to deal with.
Sure.
And it's not a matter of, I think, pushing the fear away. I think it's a matter of acknowledging that fear and being able to live with that. I think fear and faith kind of coexist. There's not one without the other. And so you can't kind of disregard one and the other. A lot of times, I think it's just a matter of kind of taking a no thank you bite. And like, I wish I know where I got that from, but it's definitely going to be a top, like, I think parenting mantra that I have for my future kid. But I think taking a no thank you bite out of things is just, for me, it means trying something once. And you might not do well at it, you might fail, but at least you tried it. And so like that's how I ended up moving twice. That's how I have ended up being a professor and a bar instructor. And next thing on my list is a podcast. It's like you try things and then if it didn't work out, that's totally fine. But at least at the end of the day, you know that you took a step forward and you tried it. And I would say that my second kind of piece of advice is don't make excuses. I have so many people that I know that, and this is all of us too, not to necessarily, ping anybody, but you either want it or you don't. And you're going to make excuses if you don't want to do it, but just be honest with yourself. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. Be honest. But if you're, making excuses, you're complaining about why you can't do something, that's usually because there's some level of fear. So it's like, don't make those excuses. Just call it out for what it is and take a step forward. And I think I've said that to many friends, and I've had a lot of people say, I did this because of you. And I'm like, that's very refreshing. What do you mean? I don't remember this conversation. And they're like, you told me to stop making excuses. And so I had a friend say, I bought a house because you told me to stop making excuses and I finally went for it. Or, I started this new workout class because you told me to stop making excuses. And I'm like, and aren't you proud of yourself? This is not about me. It's about you. You finally decided to kind of coexist with that fear and realize that those were excuses and take a no thank you bite. So
I love that.
People, it's a thing.
I love that. And both of your little lessons or bits of advice are things that I've heard differently, phrased differently, and with the same, though, core meaning. And I think it's so interesting to hear different people's take on the same topic, because I think about, for example, exercise. And as an exercise instructor, I'm sure that you will have this resonate with you a little bit. But forever, there was a certain stretch I was doing. And every time I did it as part of a video or as part of a live class, I would realize that I never felt anything. Like my muscle must have been a little more flexible than average or something, but I would get into the position and not feel anything. And then after doing that same movement about 1 million times, I heard someone say, well, imagine that you're pulling this part of you and this part of you away from each other. And then the light bulb went off that even though I had done that stretch over 100 times and never felt anything, when I did that one little direction of someone explaining it just slightly differently, I was like, oh my Lord, there's the stretch.
Yeah. I totally get that.
So I feel like your no thank you bite is kind of the idea of better an oops than a what if. So oops, didn't like it, no thank you, as opposed to always wondering. And then your second one, the no excuses, I think one of my favorite ways of putting it is like, instead of saying I don't have time or I can't do it or whatever, say it's not a priority for me and see how that feels.
Yeah.
And that can kind of be like a little bit of tough love, but probably what many of your friends and now some of our listeners might need to hear to start that exercise program or buy the house or whatever big bold move they're thinking of. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's really tough for us to be honest with ourselves, but like that's just a component of being very honest with yourself. And we all love to lie to ourselves, but like when we all are very good at it and people help us do it, but it's just, hey, is it a priority or is it not? And if it's not, that's totally fine. Just be honest with yourself, you know?
right.
It's hard, but it can be done.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So my final question for you, probably, unless there's a follow-up question for it, but I love asking this to people whose careers didn't exist when they were kids. And that's the case for someone working in social media, unless you're very young and got a job like right out of high school or something.
Right.
And of course, it doesn't encompass just career, but since that's such a big part of most of our lives and how much time we spend on things, it is definitely an impactful part of the equation. But my question is, if 8-year-old Corey had a crystal ball and could look to where you are today and all of the different bi-coastal moves you've made, the career changes, friends you've made, other fun things you've learned, and so on, as well as moving forward, you know, your foreseeable future, any plans you have for the summer, or you said a podcast was on the horizon, thinking about that. On a scale of 1 to 11, how excited would 8-year-old Corey be to see where you are now and where you're headed?
I think that 8-year-old Corey would probably be at a 9.
Okay.
I feel like people are probably like 11, but again, I'm honest with myself because
Yes.
Corey wanted to be a veterinarian or a gymnast, and I am neither of those things. However, I think little me always wanted to go away, as in like not like travel and be kind of not in Virginia. And I think that is where I'm kind of like at a 9 because it's like at the end of the day, California is pretty freaking great. There's just so many things to do, so many adventures to go on. And for me, the gist of what young me wanted was to be able to go on adventures. And I think right now for me, that is exactly what I'm on. And I feel like there's still more adventures to be had, or create adventures to create one or the other. I would say when it comes to, you know, my friends and my family and those around me, and, you know, the people that I have in my life, I feel pretty blessed to have all of those things. And I think being in California and being able to write and do something that, you know, I do love, is the cherry on top. You know, it's like I wake up and I'm like, life is pretty freaking great.
I love that.
I think like, you know, there's only more to happen and, you know, more adventures to go on. So I think young me would be pretty happy. Sad that she didn't have like 14 puppies, but you know, we'll get there. There's still time. There's still time. Yeah.
I love that so much. I know I said that you answered the question differently about purpose in a completely different way. And I honestly, when people give a sub 11 answer, I'm sometimes sad because a lot of times it's, which I understand, like always striving for more. And I haven't ever publicly answered the question myself. So I don't know if I would say 11 or if I would be hard on myself and say like I haven't achieved enough or something. But I love that you, again, took a different approach than anyone who's ever answered that for me has taken, with a 9, not because you're necessarily disappointed, but thinking about the perspective of 8-year-old you and being like, well, what the heck, where's your puppies? Which is also funny because I don't know if it was yesterday or this morning's interview because I've had a lot this week, but the movie The Kid by Disney, have you seen it with Bruce Willis?
Great movie. Great movie.
That came up for the first time after asking this question over 100 times. I think it was the first time, but just the part where he's like, you don't even have a dog. And like,
Exactly. You don't even have 14 dogs and a couple of gold medals. Like, what is this record?
Right, exactly. So I know 8-year-old me would be like, you don't live in a zoo? Like, where's the rabbits? Where's the cats?
Right. This is also confusing.
8-year-old me also didn't understand pet sitting and international travel and how expensive that could be.
Exactly. Or being woken up by a puppy peeing on the carpet. So totally fine.
Right. So I love chatting with you. Thank you so much for sharing everything, your story, your perspective, super refreshing. And I'm so excited to share this with our audience. So thank you for being with me today, Corey.
Thank you for having me on and spending time with me. This has been really great. Thanks.
Hey, my pleasure. If you ever want to ask someone who knows from experience which is best, east or west, I think Corey is the perfect person. I love how she follows her heart, and I really enjoyed our chat together. I hope that you did too. Now, if you're looking to find her on social media or looking for those book recommendations that she gave, all of that information is at the show notes, which is www.boldmovespodcast.com. So head over there for that information. Of course, I would love it if you shared this episode with anyone who you think would find it valuable or entertaining or interesting. I'd also love it if you would leave a nice review on iTunes, because I guess it's not iTunes anymore, Apple Podcasts, because that will help other people find and hear the episode. And then finally, if you subscribe, I would appreciate it. That will help you not miss an episode, including the challenge coming up on Friday from Corey. All right, thank you so much. As always, be bold and have a sparkly day. Bye-bye.